Hey guys, in this video, let's talk about GitHub. What is GitHub? GitHub, in the most simplest of terms, is simply a website where anyone can post a project. And GitHub makes it very easy for multiple people to collaborate on a single project. Meaning, different people from different parts of the world can work on the same project at the same time simultaneously using GitHub. GitHub uses Git as its version control system, so you kind of need to know Git in order to use GitHub. Let's say you're someone who has no idea what Git is, then I highly recommend you to watch my previous video where I explained everything that you need to know to get started with Git. Once you understand Git, then GitHub should be pretty easy to grasp. There are several advantages of using GitHub, especially if you're someone who is looking for a job as a software developer or a data analyst or a data scientist. You can post some interesting projects on GitHub, or perhaps you can contribute to some open source projects which should hopefully make you stand out from the crowd. Having a good GitHub profile can really help you to impress your employer in order to hire you. The contents that I'm going to cover in this video are, we'll first see how you can create your GitHub account, and we'll then see how you can create your first repository in GitHub. We'll then talk about how to post changes or push changes from your local repository into GitHub repository. We'll also do some changes in the GitHub repository and see how you can pull those changes from GitHub into your local machine. We'll then talk about how you can let different team members or your friends to collaborate on your project. We'll then see how you can clone a repository on GitHub into your local machine. And then we'll talk about the most useful feature of GitHub, that is how you can contribute to an open source project. In order to do that, we'll see how you can fork a repository, we'll see how you can do a pull request, and then we'll see how you can merge the changes that were requested by pull request. Before we get into practically seeing how we can use GitHub, if you like this video or if you find this video useful, then please make sure to subscribe to the channel and also like the video. It really helps me a lot. Thank you, and let's start. So the first thing that we need to do in order to use GitHub is to create a GitHub account. So it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to quickly show you how you can sign up to GitHub to create your account. So just go to any browser and type github.com, click on sign up, and then enter your email ID, give a very strong password, and then enter a username, and then fill up all the other details that it's going to ask you. Also verify few questions, and that's all. So it will create your GitHub account and it should look something like this. Okay, so we have created our GitHub account. The next thing that we need to do is we need to create our Git repository. So you can either click on the new button that you can see here, or on the top you have this plus button, and here you can see the option of new repository. So you can just click on that, and then it will ask you for a repository name. So you can give a name. In this case, we are going to use, we are basically going to import the digital clock project that we created in our last video where I explained Git. So I'm just going to write digital clock. And then you can give a description. So I'm just going to say, and then you can either keep your repository public or private. I'm going to leave it public. And then you can add a readme file or a .gitignore file, etc. I'm just going to create an empty repository. So I'm just going to click create repository. And that's all. The repository is created. Currently it's blank. And GitHub is already suggesting you a few things that you can do in order to import a local repository into GitHub, either by creating a new repository by using these commands, or then importing an existing repository by using these commands. We'll look into this in detail. So the one thing that we need to note here is we need to copy this URL. So this is basically the remote URL which will point to our GitHub repository, that is this one, digital clock, which is under my account TechTFQ. So I'll just copy this URL. Okay, so we have created our GitHub repository. The next thing we need to do is we need to import or push our local repository into this GitHub repository. To do that, just go to your terminal, go to the exact location where you have your project. So in my case, I had created a few projects, the digital clock project, which I created in my last video where I explained Git. So I'm going to use this project, this Git repository, and I'm going to push this into GitHub. So I'm already inside this folder. So if I see all the contents, I can see I have 3 files, one .py file, and then I have a couple of text files. And if I just look at the git log, you can see that there are already 3 commits and I'm on the branch master. There are few other branches as well. I am currently on branch master, but there is a clock branch as well as there is a red screen branch. Currently we are going to work with the master branch. So in order to push a local repository into Git repository, there are basically 2 steps. First, we need to add a remote, and then we can push the local repository into that remote repository. The command to add remote is pretty straightforward, but before we add a remote, let's just check if we already have any remotes already available. So I can do that by just saying git remote -v. There is no remotes added currently, so we'll just add a new remote. So to add a remote, I can just say git remote add origin and then the URL. So this URL that I just copied, so I'll just going to paste it here. What this command is basically doing is it's going to add a remote, and this remote will be pointing to this URL that is basically my GitHub repository, and this remote is going to be named as origin. I can name it anything that I want, but origin is a default or a standard name that we generally use, so I'm going to use the same name. So basically, remote is nothing but an address or a URL to a remote repository. In this case, this remote repository is in GitHub in my account TechTFQ. So I'll just click enter, and I click enter and the remote has been added. Let me just check if it is added. So I just do git remote -v, and you can see the remote has been added now. So the next step that we need to do is we need to push our local repository into GitHub repository. I can do that by using the git push command. So I can just say git push -u origin master. So what this command is basically doing is it's telling Git to push all the changes from the master branch into this origin, which is my remote repository. And this -u is basically standing for upstream. So what happens is for this branch, it will save this command. So the next time if I have to do a push, I don't really have to use the whole command. I can just say git push, and automatically when we are on this branch, it will just push master into this origin. Now if I just enter, you can see that it's successful. And if I go back to my GitHub repository and if I just do a refresh, you can see that now this repository that is which is in under my account TechTFQ has all the files that was present in my local repository. So if I do ls here, you have 3 files, and my GitHub repository now also has these 3 files, and there are 3 commits. If I click on commits, it will show all the 3 commits. And even here in my local repository, I had git log, I had these 3 commits. So this is basically how we have pushed the changes from our local repository into the GitHub repository. Pretty straightforward, right? Now let's say I want to make some changes in my GitHub repository and then want those changes to appear in my local repository. So I can do that by using the git pull command. So for example, let's say in GitHub, I'm going to add a file, this readme file. So I'll just click on that and I'll just leave the comment as it is, and I'm just going to commit it. So once I commit, you can see now I have this readme file in my GitHub and I have 5 commits. But if I go back to my local repository and if I see, I don't have that readme file. So in order to extract all the changes that were done on GitHub into my local repository, I can just use the git pull command. So I just say git pull origin master. So I'm using origin master because I know that I already set origin to point to this particular GitHub repository, and then master is basically the branch where the changes were done. So even in GitHub, the branch is master. So if I just execute this command, so the changes from GitHub is now pulled into my local repository, and now if I do ls, you can see that the readme file is now available here. So what I have done so far is that I had a local repository and I moved that repository into my GitHub repository. But basically only I have access to this repository. But let's say if I had a team and if I wanted my team also to work on this project, then what I can do is I can give them access. That is, I can add any team members as a collaborator. So how I can do that is I can just go into this settings tab here. And under this, I have this manage access. I can click on that. And then I have an option to invite a collaborator. So I can just click on that and then provide the username of of my team member. So in this case, let's say I have a friend James. I want to invite James so he also can contribute to this project. So I'm just going to enter his username. So his username is James 2023. So I think it's this one. So I'll just click on that and I'll add him. Now what's happening is you can see that James has been sent an invite. Now it's up to James whether he wants to accept the invite or not. So what we are going to do now is let's switch to James' computer and let's see how this invite is going to look at James' side. Okay, so James was kind enough to give me access to his system. So when I log into James' email, I can see that there is an email that GitHub has sent to James saying that TechTFQ has invited James to collaborate on the digital clock project. So he can view the invitation by clicking on this, and then he can either accept or decline the invitation. So let's say he accepts the invitation. Now basically what happens is James becomes a collaborator in this project. So meaning that both myself, that is TechTFQ, and James will have access to make any changes to this project. Okay, so just for more clarity, let's do one thing. Let me close this and let me just go to James' profile. And let me go to James' repositories. So he has a few projects here, but he doesn't really have the digital clock project that we created under TechTFQ account, but he has access to modify the digital clock. So if I just search for that project, that is this one, TechTFQ/digital clock. This is basically the project where James is also a collaborator now. Now, in order to make these changes, either he can make the changes directly on GitHub, or what he can do is he can clone this project into his local machine and then make changes in the local machine and then push the changes into this repository. Okay. Now he can do all of this because he has access on this project. So in order to clone this project, what you can do is just click on this code, and here you have this URL. Just click on copy. And after that, go to your terminal. So I'm on James' desktop. So let's say I want to clone that project here. So I can just type git clone and that URL. So that's all. Now the project, which is under TechTFQ, has been cloned into James' system. Now he can see that by just going into this folder or into this repository, just saying digital clock. Let me clear this, and you can see that there are these two files. So he can do any modification into this project. So let's say he wants to do some changes into this program. Okay, so I'll just open this, and let's say we just want to change the background color from steel blue to something like, let's say, dark green. Okay, and I want to change welcome to hello. Okay, that's all. So now we'll just close it. And so basically James has done some changes to this file. We can see the git status to see that this file has been modified. Now let's add and commit it. Git add and then do a git commit. Okay, so James has done some changes and committed his changes. Now he wants to push these changes into the GitHub repository. So again, he needs to do two things. One, he needs to add the remote, which will point to the GitHub repository. And second, he needs to push those changes. So let's first check what do we have in remote. And you can see that the Git remote is already having the particular remote, basically the URL, which is pointing to the digital clock project under TechTFQ account. This is because whenever you clone a project from GitHub, automatically remote will point to that particular repository URL. Okay, so remote is already added. The next thing we need to do is we just need to push these changes. So I can just say git push -u origin master. And that's all. The changes have been pushed. Now if I go back here and if I just refresh this project, you can see that there's an additional commit that has been added. It's saying 1 minute ago, and it's been added by James, and he's saying change welcome message and background. So the changes which were done by James also are now reflecting in this project. So this is basically how multiple people can work on the same project if they have collaborator access. Now let's look at one of the most widely used features of GitHub, that is pull request. Pull request is basically how you can contribute to anyone else's project. So if you have collaborator access to a project, then you can straight away make changes to that project. But let's say if you do not have the access to a project, then you can still contribute to that project by raising a pull request. And we are going to see how to do that. There are a few steps that we need to do. First, we need to identify a project where we want to contribute. So I am under my account TechTFQ, and let's say I want to again use my friend's account, that is James account. So let me go into James account, that is James 2023. Okay, so now I'm under James profile under his repository, and I can see a few repositories here. The repository that I am interested in contributing is this scrape IMDb. So I'll just enter into that, and I'm not a collaborator in this project, so I do not have access to make changes to this project. So the only way I can contribute is by doing a pull request. And in order to do pull request, the first thing that we need to do is we need to fork this project. Now what fork will do is it is just going to create an exact copy of this project under my account. So currently this project is owned by James, and you can see that here. If I just click on this fork button here, what it's going to do is it's going to create a replica of that project in my account. Now it's telling there is a scrape IMDb project under the user TechTFQ, and it is forked from James scrape IMDb project. Okay, so this is what fork does. So basically we have created a copy of that project from someone else's account into our own account. Once we have done this, what we can do is we can clone this project into our local repository. So I just go to click on code, I copy the URL, and then go back to my terminal. Let me clear this and let me go back, and I have a few projects here, but you can see I do not have the scrape IMDb project. So I'm just going to clone that project here. So I just say git clone and paste that URL. This is going to clone that project, and now if I just do ls, you can see that there is a scrape IMDb project that has been added. Now let me just change my directory into that. So I just say I'm into scrape IMDb. Let me clear this, and you can see that there is one file in this repository. So now what I'm going to do is I want to do some contributions. So for example, let's say I just want to add a readme file for this project, so it becomes more clear on what this project is about. So I'm going to just say echo, and I'm saying okay, and I'm just going to call this file like readme.emd. So I've added this file. You can see that the new file has been added. Let me add and commit this into our Git repository. So I just say git add, and then I say git commit file. So I have added this file. Now what I want to do is I want to push these changes into my Git repository. So let me first check the remote, git remote -v. As I told you, whenever we clone a repository, Git will by default make the remote to point at that particular repository. So I don't have to explicitly add remote here. The thing that I need to do is I need to push the changes into that GitHub repository by using the git push command. So I just say git push -u origin master. And that's all. Now if I go back to my GitHub, so I am under my account, you can see that this is repository is under my account. If I just do a refresh, you can see that there is a readme file that has been added, and the last commit was done by TechTFQ. So this is basically the scrape IMDb project which I have forked from James. But these changes are not present in the original project that is owned by James. So what I need to do is I need to raise a pull request. So this will basically send a request to James saying that TechTFQ has done some changes and he would like you to consider these changes and merge those changes into the original repository. So just go to pull request and you click on new pull request. So when you click on new pull request, just notice what happens to the repository. You click new pull request and the repository will now point to the original repository which is owned by James. And here you can see that it's telling able to merge, meaning that the changes that I have done is not conflicting with any changes that are available in the original repository. And that's a good thing. If there were conflicts, then we had to manually fix it. So it's also here telling that the base repository is the James scrape IMDb repository, and it's under the branch master. And the changes that I have done is in TechTFQ scrape IMDb repository, and it's under the branch master as well. This is actually not a best practice. Generally, whenever we are doing a pull request, we would generally make the changes in a different branch and then send that branch into the original repository. But for this tutorial video, I think this should be okay. So what I can just do is I can also see what are the files changed. It's telling one file changed, and this is basically the readme file that I have added when all the contents of this file. So I'll just click on create pull request. I can add a comment and some description. So I'm just going to say added. I have written some comment. I'm just going to click create pull request, and that's all. So a pull request has been created, and what happens is this pull request will now be seen by the owner of the original project, that is James. So for better understanding, let's now switch to James' system so we see how that pull request is received by him. So I'm using James' system now, and I'm under his GitHub repository, and if I click on the scrape IMDb repository, he can see that there is a pull request. So, and he can see that there is one new pull request that has been created, and if he just clicks on that, he can see that this is a pull request that has been requested by or created by TechTFQ, and he's telling that he has added a readme file which should explain the project more clearly, and he can also see what are the files that has been changed and what are the changes that has been done, etc. So from here, he can, if he wants, he can review the changes. So under the files changed, he can review the changes and tell that whether he wants TechTFQ to make any more changes, or if he thinks these changes are not valid or anything. So for now, I'm just going to do an approve, and I'm going to click submit review. And after that, I'm just going to do a merge pull request. So when I click on this and when I confirm the merge, what happens is the changes that were suggested by TechTFQ through this pull request will get merged into the original repository of which is owned by James into his master branch. And here I can leave a comment. That's all. I'm just going to leave this comment, and that's all. The pull request has been basically completed, and it will get closed automatically once I have merged these changes. So now if I go back, or if I just refresh, so let's say if I just refresh this, and you can see that a readme file has been added into the original repository. I'm in the original repository which is under James, and if I go to pull request, you can see that there is one closed. That means the pull request that was created by TechTFQ was closed now because it is completed. That's all. So this is basically how any user who wants to contribute to a project which is where he does not have access or he's not the owner, he can raise a pull request by first forking the project from that another user into his own account, and then cloning that project into his local machine, then making changes, and then pushing those changes from local repository into the GitHub repository which is owned by himself, and then finally raising a pull request so the changes can be seen by the original owner, and then it's up to the owner of the project to whether accept those changes or reject it. So this is basically what a pull request does. There are a lot more that we can do with GitHub, but hopefully all of this that we explained in this video should be good enough for you to get started with GitHub. If you like this video, then please make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video, and leave any comments or any feedbacks that you might have related to GitHub. Thank you.